6 o'clock, so we'd like to start. Just turning my phone off. So my name's Larry Linthicum, and I'm our superintendent, and how's the volume, Ryan, how's the volume? Okay. Like to thank you guys for coming on this nice warm evening. Your warmth will warm things up here, so we know it's a little chilly outside, but it's warm in here. We did call off school tomorrow, so no school tomorrow due to the wind advisory. It's chilly, we know that. So anyway, we're excited, and here's why we're here. We care what you think. We're gathering input. Before we start, we have some of our folks here, and I'd like to just introduce our school board members that are here. We have Ken Enlow, back here, Ken. Laura Massman and Lorelei Swartz, Steve Bruce, and Scott Hovis. Okay, so thank them for being here as we're gathering. Give them a round of applause here. So, but anyway, this is our first one that's a community-wide town hall with regards to our start times and end times at our schools. We understand this is changes pain. And at the end of the day, we have three pillars that we believe everything kind of ties to. Number one is learning. Number two is partnerships. And number three is stewardship. So the reason why we're here tonight, how does it impact those three pillars that we believe guide and drive everything we do as our core values? So number one, does this improve or not improve? Does it lower or increase student learning? So we have some data on that, so we're looking at that. Number two, the partnership aspect is we care what you think. We value your input. We want to try to put ourselves in your shoes, have empathy, and look at, hey, we are in this together, and we firmly, strongly believe that we are stronger together, not just to sound good, but to mean what does that really mean? So the partnership aspect. And number three is the stewardship. Are we being a good steward of patron resources through your tax dollars? And if we can save some money through this, is that being a good steward and the stewardship piece? So with those in mind, I'll lead this in Jason Hoffman. He's our CFO, COO, and got a presentation, and then we'll go through and we're going to give you an opportunity, one, for your voice to be heard, but we'd like your ideas on how we can make it better as we continue to move forward. So, Jason, with that, I'll turn that over to you.
All right, thanks. So what we're going to do, I'm going to go through this presentation. You have some notepads, so you have the pros and cons we're going to go through, and then we have a sticky note, and if there are things we didn't cover, we're going to have you put those back on the board. We're going to collect those and try and get as many questions answered tonight as we can. So we're talking about the start and end times of our schools, and unfortunately, the reason we have to talk about that is our busing and the transporting of our students. And you might think, why does that really matter? And the reason is because we are trying to run a tiered routing system, and I'll explain why that's so important to us. And most large school districts try to do this because there's a huge financial savings to do this. So we contract with First Student. This scenario would be the same if we contracted with anybody, any other contractor, if we operated buses on our own. This math works out the same way. So if we have a bus and it leaves the bus barn and it runs a Lewis and Clark route and it goes back to the bus barn, we do that 174 times, runs a morning route and an afternoon route, 174 school days. That costs the school district $44,000. That's what we pay to First Student for that. If then that bus, we have a second bus that runs an elementary route. So it leaves the bus barn, runs an elementary route, goes back to the bus barn. Those two separate single tier routes. That would be another $44,000, so almost $89,000 to run both of those routes as single routes. So what we've done is we've tiered this, and so instead of that bus running that Lewis and Clark route and then a second bus running an elementary route, that bus runs the Lewis and Clark route, and then instead of going back to the bus barn, it runs an elementary route at that time. And so that second route, instead of costing $44,000, it cost us about $4,500. So instead of $89,000 to run those two routes, it cost us $49,000. So every time we can tier buses like that, it saves us $40,000 every time we can do that. And you might think, why in the world is it that much savings? If you think about how First Student would operate their business, they have to make sure they cover all their costs with that first bus. They have to cover the cost of the bus. A bus costs about $120,000 now. So they have to cover all the cost of the bus. They have to cover all the salary and benefits of the driver. They have to cover all the salary and benefits of the mechanics at the bus barn, the rent of the bus barn, their insurance, all of their overhead has to be covered with that first route. So now you've pretty much got a paid for asset with that first route. And then the second route, the only costs are a little bit of wear and tear on the bus. If you put more miles on the bus, obviously there's some cost to that. And then the driver has to be paid also. So that's why there's such a difference. Does that make sense? So unfortunately, we're trying to tier as many routes as we can, but the way we have our current start and end times of our schools doesn't really lend itself to do it successfully. So here are our start and end times for all of our secondary schools. We actually have more secondary students that ride the bus than we do elementary. And if you think about it, there's one more grade in 6 through 12 than there is K through 5. So we need all of our buses to run secondary routes, and then all of our tiered ones are elementaries. So you see they all start about 8 o'clock currently. And where we have trouble is the start and end times of all of our elementary schools are all over the board. We have our 2 schools in Callaway County that both start at 8 o'clock. We have our 2 schools on the extreme east and west side of the district, Pioneer Trail and Morrill Heights, that are 8:15. We have our 4 schools that are in kind of the central core of the city that are 8:30. And then we have Bel Air, Cedar Hill, Lawson at 9, and early childhood special ed at 8:50.
And one thing, this is my 4th year here, that just on having conversation, and you probably have your own opinion, over time, over 25 years, that's why we have a variation of our start times. When they were all at 8, and then somebody needed 15 more minutes because of this, and some started at 9, well then we need to go to 8:30 because of reasons A, B, and C, and may have been very valid reasons. Over 25 years, as a result of that, we are spread across from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock, which in addition makes it challenging if we want to have a PD, professional development, for all of our second grade teachers, let's say. After school, we are unable to do that because of the differing start times of all of our elementary schools. So we would like to get some consistency, if possible, as we assess and try to determine if this is something we want to do moving forward.
So like I said, we're trying to make this work, and unfortunately, it's just that we're trying to make it work. We really don't have enough time. It would work out much better. We would get better service if we actually had 1 hour between the start and end times of our tiers. And I put on there that the average routes for all of our secondary schools are 46 minutes, and we all understand how averages work. Some routes are a little shorter, some routes are longer, but on average it's 46 minutes. So you need at least 46 minutes to run that route. Then if you have a little extra time to get to your next location, so we really need an hour to do this effectively. So since we don't have an hour, it causes us some issues. And so some of the issues are, obviously we can't tier Callaway Hills or North, because their start and end times is exactly the same as all of our secondary schools. So in all of Callaway County, we're running single routes. We run elementary routes as single routes, we run secondary routes as single routes, so it's pretty expensive. We're not really able to tier Pioneer Trail and Morrill Heights because they're 8:15, and so you only have 15 or 20 minutes. And so what we do with those schools, which in my opinion isn't ideal either, Pioneer Trail, we have K-8 buses. So Pioneer Trail and TJ kids are on the same bus. And then at Morrill Heights, we have 2 K-12 buses. So they come in from the east side, they actually go to Morrill Heights, and students transfer to different buses and then go to Lewis and Clark or the high school. So then that leaves our 4 8:30 schools, and so there's really 30 minutes between the start and end times. Average of 46 minutes. We try to take the shortest routes, but we're getting mediocre service at best. We're not getting the students there as early in the morning as we'd like for them to have breakfast. The buses aren't there at the end of the day, so teachers are supervising students after the end of the school day instead of getting on to their meetings or other things that they need to take care of. So it really only leaves 3 elementary schools and Southwest Early Childhood that we can really do a good job tiering. So we're currently doing this as often as we can. and we have 37 double routes. So we've saved $40,000 37 times. So if we wanted to undo that and let people start whenever they wanted and have all single routes, we would need to spend another $1.5 million. We don't have another $1.5 million, and even if we did, I think we could spend that money more efficiently. On top of that, we really couldn't get 37 more drivers. Even if we had $1.5 million more drivers, $100 million more dollars, we have a driver shortage the way it is. So 37 more drivers would be nearly impossible to find.
And I might touch on, so what that looks like. So he had touched on at Morrill Heights is a K-12. So we have 2 of our routes there that has students from kindergartners and seniors at the high school. So we would like to try to have, as far as elementary, student behaviors can be an issue. That's no excuse to allow, it just makes it more challenging. I drove bus too. I got my CDL because one of the top 5 complaints that I get across the district is about our buses. So I got my CDL to drive a bus so I could experience it myself. I'm driving a route next Monday so I can better experience it. And it is a challenge with those tiered, trying to do a double route when you do not have an hour time between the 2.
So what we do 9 through 12 currently is pretty efficient. We bring all students from the whole 230 square miles of the district, and we bring them basically to one location between Simonson and the high school, but it's one location. As we split to 2 high schools next year, we lose that efficiency, and because we're delivering to 2 separate high schools, and per student is ran projections, and it'll take between 5 and 8 more single routes next year. So if we don't do anything with our start and end times, we keep things the way they are, and we now deliver to both high schools, we're going to be spending $225,000 to $350,000 more dollars and getting the same service that's not really what we would like. So we also then asked first student, all right, what would it look like if we had 1 hour time? We had all the elementary starting at one time. We had all the secondary starting an hour different, and they ran the projections with elementary first, and then they ran the projections with secondary first. And they came back and they said there's really no price difference. It doesn't really matter who goes first as far as price to first student. Now they did say that there are fuel efficiencies to having the elementary go first, because if you think about it, at Callaway Hills route, the student, they run the route in Callaway Hills, they drop off at Callaway Hills, they're already there, so they run that route again, and then they deliver them here. Where if we did secondary first, they would run the area, come here, then we'd have to get a bus back up there to run a Callaway Hills route. So we would spend more in fuel, but it's not a huge cost like the actual tiering savings. But so by doing that and having a 1 hour difference, instead of spending $250,000 to $350,000 more dollars next year, we'll actually spend about $150,000 less. So an apples to apples comparison of doing nothing or changing our times to an hour spread saves about $500,000 a year. And then if we have an hour, it should remedy some of the service issues that we're getting. So what we're looking at 2 different options, having all the elementary schools start first somewhere a little before 8 o'clock, getting out a little before 3, secondary is a little before 9, getting out a little before 4, and then the other option is that just reversed. So we've actually talked about this a few times since I've been here, so we know a lot of the pros of doing this, we know a lot of the cons, and so we'd like to go through the handout that's on your sheet. And so this is the option if we had the elementary going first. And as we've looked at this in the past, we've known that we have inefficiencies with our times. We knew we could save some money, but there's been a lot of research that has come out that says secondary students should start school later in the day. The American Academy of Pediatrics, that is their #1 platform nationwide, that all secondary schools should start after 8:30. And the science, it's way beyond me, but it's about the biological development of adolescents and sleep patterns, and we have some stuff on our website, and we're looking to get more of this research out there. But optimal start time for the secondary students is later. There's less scientific research about when elementary students should go, but we hear a lot from our own teachers, our elementary teachers, who say our little ones, our kindergartners, our first graders, they've been up early in the morning, By 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they're spent. We've been around a lot of our buildings. We're going to every one of our buildings. And when we talk to our 9 o'clock schools, you see a lot of heads nodding when we start talking about behavior issues and how their students perform late in the day. So our elementary buses, the routes average about 25 minutes. So if you're running the shorter routes early in the morning, that first stop in the morning is not going to be as early as if we're running 46-minute routes in the morning. So that first stop will be not as early. We're actually able to tier more, so we would be able to shorten some of our elementary routes, decrease the amount of students on the buses if we did an elementary first. It moves the time of day when our high school student drivers are driving to school. Currently, with an 8 o'clock start time, they're crossing the bridge when everybody that's going to work is crossing the bridge. They're driving around in that central area of town with all the traffic right in rush hour. If you move that back, they'll be driving outside of rush hour. And then our high school schedules are more flexible. We've been working with the counselors that there could be a voluntary 0 hour that could be offered. Students can do work programs where they can, at the end of the day, they can go to work and still earn high school credits. So as we've talked about this in the past, one of the things that has stopped us from moving forward is that it really does cause an issue for our families. It's changing how they handle their child care on their elementary students. And we understand currently secondary students get out of school first, they're home before the elementary students get there, and that is how a lot of our families handle the child care of their elementary students. And so this is a new burden that we understand will be placed on our families, and we're gonna, if this is the direction we go, we know we're gonna have to work with families to help them find affordable child care after school. We also know that in our community we have families that depend on their high school students to go to work to provide money for their families. So if they're not able to get to work as early, that goes away. Also, we know we have employers in our community that need our high school students as their workers. So that's as we got to looking at the voluntary 0 hour, the work programs. Are there ways that we can get students the schooling they need and still get to work? We know how much everyone loves change. It's really not popular, and this scenario basically changes the schedule of everybody in the district. The only people that don't have much of a change are the 2 Callaway County elementary schools. All the secondaries move back, all the elementaries move up, so it's just a lot of change happening. After school activities, we know that as people that participate in activities, they go and they participate in sports, they do speech and debate, they go and travel. We know they're already missing class, so now if the end of the day is later, they're going to be missing more class. We feel a little bit better about this and that we're now having 2 smaller high schools, so hopefully we'll be traveling a little less. We're going to have extra gyms at both high schools, so we'll have more practice spaces so we can have practices going on at the same times. But there's no doubt, if you get out of school later, you're probably going to miss some more school in the afternoon, and practices are going to be ending later.
And part of that travel time is a conference, which includes the 3 high schools in Columbia with Rock Ridge, Battle, and Hickman, and then our 2 JC and Capital City, and then Helias and Sedalia. So will there be travel to St. Louis, to Arkansas, Kansas City? Yes, there will be some of that. We think it will be minimized, and as Jason touched on, having smaller schools. Right now, schools will not play JC because of the size of our school, and we anticipate some schools geographically that will play against us because our schools are half the size with having 2 high schools.
So if you're running your shortest routes in the morning, those longer routes are now happening in the afternoon. So if we have a student that attends school here at Lewis and Clark and lives in the extreme parts of Callaway County, they're not getting out until 3:50, they're not going to be getting home until maybe after 5 o'clock. And then what we thought was originally a con is we think we have a solution for this, but at Nichols Career Center, we're the receiving district for students from neighboring towns, Blair Oaks, Russellville, California, they send students to Nichols Career Center. And we thought originally that if we are changing our times, are we going to cause a burden on these neighboring communities? And as we work through this with Nichols, we currently serve all the sending students in the morning, and then we serve the Jefferson City students in the afternoon. So we don't think we could have to change it all. We might just have Nichols on a different schedule. So the sending students would still come at 8. Jefferson City and Capital City students would come in the afternoon, and they would just be on a different schedule than Jefferson City High School. So that's going through elementary going first. So thinking about if secondary goes first, really all the pros become cons and all the cons become pros. There's not a whole lot different. So if we have secondary going first, we don't cause this issue of childcare with having because the secondary students will still be home in the afternoon to take care of younger siblings. We're changing fewer. All the secondaries would basically be the same. It would basically be moving some of our elementaries later. After school activities, students won't be missing as much class, and the activities will be done earlier. The cons, it goes against the research for optimal learning time for our secondary students. So if you now take that Callaway County resident that attends school here, now instead of getting home after 5 o'clock, they're going to be getting on the bus before 6 o'clock in the morning. So one thing that is different with this, though, if we start moving our elementary schools later, we are going to cause a new child care issue for parents in the morning, because if you have all your secondary students at school in the morning, now we're not going to open our elementary schools until 8:50. Normally our staff comes on board 30 minutes ahead of time. That's 8:20. People have to be at work at 8 o'clock. There's a new child care issue that if this is the direction we go, this is where we have to try and find a solution. So we've been talking about this for a while. I gave this presentation to the board in November. Dr. Schindorf talked about a lot of the scientific research with the board meeting in December. We talked about it again in January. And so far the board has said, yes, this makes sense, but we need to get feedback. And so that's why we're here tonight. That's why we've been to, I think, 13 buildings already. We're going to go to the rest of the buildings. We have another town hall on Thursday night. We're going to do focus group with some student groups, secondary student groups. And then the plan is to take a recommendation of one of these two to the board in February for a final approval in March, because we understand that we are impacting people's schedules and we need to give people time to plan on how they're going to deal with that. And we need to come up with plans on how we can help people.
And one thing, when Jason touched on if the secondary went later, that he's touched on before, is with the Columbia schools, we touched on their schools, the Rockridge, Hickman, and Battle, they start 8:50 to 4 o'clock is when they go. So it would align with that if that option was chosen. So here's what we want to do. You have Post-its in front of you, and you have pens. If you don't have one, let us know or speak up. If there's questions that you feel like from your lens that we did not address, we would like you to put your question on one of the Post-it notes, and when you get it on there, you can go to either one of the easels there, the yellow notepads, put those questions on there. We're going to see if there's themes. Shelby, Brenda, they'll be looking at those and collecting those, and then we'll try to address those. You may have 40 questions, you may have one. We're not sure. So if you have questions, put those on the notepads. We'll give you a minute or two, and then we'll go to the next step here on having some table activities. And if you need more Post-its, we got it. A question that you think that we should address, put that on the Post-it note, please. Yes. slide? Yes. Here are the two options that we're considering. And obviously a third option would be, or a first option would be, to do nothing. We understand that.
You can hold it up.
And then secondary. Okay, does anybody need any more time on your question? Here's what we're going to do with those questions. So, once you get your questions, we're going to collect those and we're going to go through those. But before we do that, we're going to go to the next part that we'd like for you to do at your table. So, if you don't need any more time for your questions, raise your hand if you need any more time. Okay, we're going to collect those and we'll address each one of those. Here's what we'd like to do now. On each of your table, there is a sheet that says, one side of it says elementary starting earlier. What are we missing? The pros and the cons. And on the other side of it, it says secondary starting earlier. What are we missing? Pros and cons. So we would like, if you would, with your neighbors, whether by table, we're not going to have you number off in the ones and the twos, etc., or odds and evens. Just in your area, whether however many you have, if you would collectively bounce some things off each other, and then we will ask you guys to report those out if you would. So take some time here, get in groups if you would, that's convenient, and then we will ask you to report back. But before then, we'll go through each of the questions that you've already put on the boards next. So go ahead. Okay, we're gonna have a timer of 5 minutes. Keep track of time here to finish this, and then we're gonna answer your questions, and then we'll have your report out.
Yeah, 47 months, probably right out of now. Yeah, it's right at an hour.
Okay, if you'd wrap this up, if you need more time, we'll give you time. We give you about 6.5 minutes. Raise your hand if your group needs some more time. Okay, we want to be respectful of your time. So we're going to go through each of your questions that you put on the Post-it notes. So I think we have some categories. We're going to address your questions and then we'll have you report out. She's going to put the questions that you put on Post-it notes here on the screen so you can see those. Brian Schindorf, our Chief of Learning, what were the categories, Brian?
So there were several questions about the before and after care services, a few questions about breakfast and lunch scheduling, questions about before and after school activities like athletics, trainings, and practices. And then there were some individualized questions that'll come up here.
Can you read in the back? Ask for larger font. Larger? Larger? Yes.
So the first one was, what option is the district favoring? And I will.
Well, we are honestly trying to weigh the pros and cons. At the end of the day, if we're going to recommend a change from what we're currently doing, we need to be able to weigh the pros and the cons with regards to how it aligns with our 3 pillars of learning, stewardship, and partnership. So regardless of option 1 and 2, both of them, there's significant savings. Okay? Jason was talking about, he's going through the budget right now, and we have more needs than we do resources. So as we try to prioritize, if we can have $500,000 more that could be utilized to focus on teaching and learning, we need to examine that. So we're asking for the input, still gathering feedback to determine if option 1 or option 2 is the best option. So that is if you say I'm skirting or riding the fence, that's fair. It's too early for us to say, here's where we're leaning as we're trying to consider the options. So have you considered all starting at the same time? I had been on the job about 3 weeks, and I think it was Steve Bruce and I on the Sunday morning radio show, and somebody called and said, why don't all of our schools start at 8 o'clock? And I remember saying, that's a really good question. I really didn't know. And when I went back and talked to Jason that it would cost us $1.5 million more. So that is an option that we know. We've not seriously considered that because we think if we could have differing start times to have $1.5 million to focus on teaching and learning, that is being a good steward. So you may disagree with that. I respect that. We feel like we could better utilize the resources if we had the tier. Is that with the different locations, accommodate staff with children at different buildings? So we know this is a challenge. We've had discussions. So let's say we're here at Lewis and Clark. So if I'm a staff member and I teach here at Lewis and Clark, that let's say we're going later and the elementary school is going earlier, and if I drop if I need to, that'd be easier I'll give the more difficult scenario. If I teach at Moral Heights, okay, and if we were starting at 8 o'clock at Moral Heights and starting 9 o'clock here, and I teach at Moral Heights, but I normally bring my child to school here at Lewis and Clark, what am I going to do? Okay? Number one, I want folks to have confidence in our buses to feel comfortable with them riding them. They may not, I understand that. We're trying to address all of that. My kids ride the bus because I think it's important. But if they do want to take their kids to school, that is always an option. If I work at Moral Heights, that I could bring my child with me to school at Moral Heights, then they could get on, because that would be a tiered route. When a bus drops off kids at Moral Heights, elementary kids, that any secondary kids of staff members could get on that bus and come here when they drop that off for that double tiered route. Okay, so that is an option on that. We would need to look at each scenario and how to accommodate our staff for arrangements on that of how we would do that. Was that the primary, Brian, Jason, that we talked about?
I think we would it's just one of the scenarios we're going to have to work through, because it's not just our staff that are going to have issues. It's going to be it's going to be people all throughout the community. And so that is our biggest issue that we're going to need to solve going forward. And we're looking forward to working through that with people.
The average bus route is 46 minutes. What is the longest bus route? An hour and 5 minutes is the longest secondary, or the longest route of any of them is an hour and 5 minutes. An hour to an hour and 5. Yes, sir.
My daughter gets on the bus at 6:05 in the morning. She's dropped off here at 7:48 usually when she gets here. So
Okay.
she rides the bus for an hour and 40 minutes.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Now granted, I'm as far east as you can get in the school district.
I appreciate you sharing that. I think you said the hour and 5 was in the afternoon, but on the morning, I think that would be the longest route. Would that be fair to say?
19, plus 19?
Bus 19?
No, it's bus 48.
48?
Yep,
Oh, okay, you said furthest east, I'm sorry, you're talking about furthest northeast then.
yeah.
Okay.
So, right there, an hour and 45 minutes. So that is that's a long time on the bus. So we understand that.
Sorry about that, I misled you.
It's all right. That's why we're here to learn. What's the next one? Is the district considering not allowing early morning practices or activities? We would need to explore that. We allow our schools to do that now. There is competition for gymnasiums. There's competition for practice time. Scheduling, we know, is very challenging. So whether they're continuing at 8 o'clock or 7:50 for secondary, or if they were going at 8:50, we know in the Columbia schools, some of their activities, and they've chosen to have early because many of them work after school. So we would need to consider those options. If from your lens that we should say, hey, we're not even allowing that, we're afraid that it might jeopardize or not have as many students participate. And one of our goals is for all of our students to find something outside of math, science, history, and English to get connected in. Yes?
You would not provide busing to early morning practice?
We would not. We currently do not. The question was, would we provide transportation for practices if they had that before school? We would continue not to do that as we do not now. Okay, so we have a pediatrician would share information on that. Not sure who that is, if you would like to. Yes, ma'am. Wait, I'll give you the mic if you'd like.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Jennifer Kraus. I'm a pediatrician, and I also have children who attend Jeff City schools. Yes, in 2014, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommended that middle and high schools start no earlier than 8:30 based on research. This is because around puberty, people's circadian rhythms shift to where they fall asleep later at night and wake up later in the morning. So it's difficult for some adolescents to fall asleep at the times they need to get up really early in the morning. Adolescents need 8 to 10 hours of sleep every night, and many of our students are not getting that. So some research studies have looked at what happens if secondary schools start school later, and there is decreased rates of tardiness, decreased absenteeism, improved academic performance. One study showed decreased self-reported depression symptoms among some students, decreased rates of traffic accidents among 17 and 18-year-olds. And there are multiple studies now that are contributing to this thought that these secondary schools should start later. So I'm a resource if anyone has any questions about the research.
Thank you so much for that resource. Okay, are we going to lose breakfast in the classroom? I don't believe that we will be impacted. That's something they've started at Morrill Heights, and that's going very well, and potentially looking at expanding that across the district, and we do not see this having any impact on of not having that in the future. Yes, absolutely.
That sounds cool.
They say, Ron, I'll let you address this.
So basically, it is the concept of creating communities within your classroom, and so spending time eating together and organizing that within your room, that they create class communities and they spend time eating together, as opposed to a large cafeteria where it's noisy and loud and find a seat and eat your food in a hurry. Now we have a little bit more time, they sit in the classroom, they communicate, so it's actually a social building.
Okay, good question.
Participation goes up also if they're in the classroom. They're just right there. It's easy, convenient.
What time will breakfast end if Nichols Career Center starts earlier than JC High School? Then lunch starts 2.5 hours. Basically, the sending, we do not feed our sending school students, so they are on breakfast on their own if they come from Blair Oaks or Southern Boone or California, etc. Some of our sending schools, we do not provide breakfast for them, so that will not be impacted by that. And the lunchtime starts 2.5.
But they eat at their home schools also, breakfast and lunch.
Right, and I don't know if they were meaning JC students. We do not feed breakfast or lunch for our sending school students.
I'm the one that asked the question. I work at the high school with student service. And I see kids from Blair Oaks, Elias, all them in the cafeteria, morning and afternoon, at lunchtime. And my question was, you're gonna start Nichols earlier, you're gonna run one breakfast, and then run a second breakfast, or school starts later, you're gonna run it continuously through, and your school starting at 10 minutes to 9, now you eat lunch at 11:30, that's only 2 hours and 45 minutes, you can move all your lunch lines back farther. Now they're going to impact your staffing for that stuff.
I'll let Gary Verslois, I was not aware of, driving the schedule on our lunches and breakfasts is to serve Jeff City students. Now, I was not aware if some of our sending schools, if we can do that to provide them, hey, we're all in this together, but as the primary guiding factor would be our students, but.
Yeah, so Mark, 2 years ago, I was a sending school principal, and we were pushing it to get them here on time. So if some of my former students, when I was a building principal, were coming here to eat breakfast, I had no idea they were doing that. So, but as far as the lunch times, they would pretty much stay put. The only difference is the sending schools, they would have their 3-hour time slot at Nichols in the morning. Our Jeff City kids will have the 3-hour time slot in the afternoon. The only difference is with going to a 7-period day is our Jeff City kids, after their 3-hour afternoon time slot at Nichols, they would go to a 7th period class. That keeps the lunch shifts pretty much where they are. Was that good enough for you?
Well, now you have 3.5 hours, 3 3/4 hours from breakfast to lunch. You're going to be cutting it down by an hour. So you're going to have kids coming in and eating breakfast at 8:30. At 8:30 and 11:30, they're back in the cafeteria for lunch. And then they got the rest of the day to go, and they're going to be there till 4 o'clock. Makes me no difference. I have no kids.
Yeah. And if they've got to be shifted a little bit, then everything shifts to make it fair and equitable for staff and everyone. But to sit there and say we have every minute detail worked out, we'll work together. And I'll still come visit you.
No, I appreciate the question. I feel that's an example that Battle, Hickman, and Rockbridge, they made this shift, and I've got a good relationship with the school system in Columbia as far as, hey, what did you change to, what worked, what didn't? You guys have worked out the kinks in 3 or 4 years. What should we do, or what would you do if you were to do it again? We ask those questions all the time, so I think we can work through that. I was not aware that our sending schools were eating, so I learned something here tonight. So, Jason, you want to do the next here?
School board aware of youth programs in the community or child care options? We currently partner with the YMCA and Boys and Girls Club. And so as we pick one of these, we know that we need to go and get with both of those organizations and try and have them help us come to that solution. Okay? True. We also, so teachers are only on contract for a certain amount of time outside of the school day, and we have currently students that arrive before that time now. And so we have teachers that we pay to supervise students before school. We have some after school. So those stipends may change on who gets those, but we're already paying teachers currently to supervise students in some areas. Yes, ma'am. We haven't yet, just because we don't know which way we're going, but we've had preliminary discussions with both the Y and Boys and Girls Club, but since we don't know exactly what's gonna happen yet, we haven't had detailed conversations yet. But
we
both
will.
organizations know that this conversation is happening.
So after the conversation, should we have another one of you so that you can update community members on the further details?
I'll answer, whether we have one here at Lewis and Clark, or two, we'll have opportunities for our patrons and community through whether coffee with Larry's, an agenda item in our board meeting, brown bag lunch with Larry. We're gonna have where you can bring your lunch and we'll just talk about questions or concerns to try to address those, so. And if you don't feel like there's an avenue for you to address anything, ma'am, I would love to have a cup of coffee and we'll make sure and get your answers if those opportunities do not take care of that.
I know there were a few questions about what's going to happen with the savings. We're right in our budgeting time right now, and so if you think about it, it's not all savings. Some of the $500,000 is cost avoidance, because one of the things that'll happen if we don't do anything, we're going to spend more. The other one is there's a little bit of savings. So there's a $500,000 difference, but the savings is only $150,000 or $160,000. That's still significant. We had a long meeting yesterday where we're in prime budgeting time, and we have a list of needs that already outpaces our resources. And so we're prioritizing our needs, and we had a really good meeting yesterday talking and trying to prioritize all that. So that's money that goes into a pool. It's not earmarked for anything, but it helps us to fill those needs.
With the focus of teaching and learning. I mean, at the end of the day, where the rubber meets the road is teaching and learning, so is a primary focus. Do you have a next question? Is there any more on there? Can extra money? Jason, you're a finance guy. Can it? Yeah, it can.
Absolutely. We're in the education business. 80% of our budget is in salaries and benefits. So if we have money, there's a really good chance that 80% of that's going to go in that direction. So there's a great chance that that's where it's going to go. As we listed our priorities yesterday, it was exclusively staffing positions that we need throughout the district.
Can you scroll down so we can see the next question? You can't type and scroll down at the same time, Brenda? Is that it? Is that all the questions? So we have another question that was, oh, will secondary schools be opened earlier if they are first? If they are second? I think that would need to be determined. So if the school starts at 8:50, instead of 30 minutes, 8:20, especially I would anticipate them being open more than 30 minutes. As a general rule, we want to work with families, and if there are folks dropping kids off and they go to work at 8 o'clock, we understand we'll need to be able to provide adequate times and availability to drop their kids off. So that's not been determined, but we do anticipate allowing that. Is that safe to say? Secondary level? Okay. Is that the last one? Oh, we got one more? Or if you feel like that somebody wadded up your Post-it note and threw it in the corner, how do you plan to accommodate the families who work at 8 o'clock with regards to if you go to work at 8 and your elementary is later, or meaning if you were dropping a child off of a school that would start then at 8:50, is that the question? Correct? I think that would be, so let's say elementary school is going at 8:50. Let's give that example. And you went to work at 8 and you need to drop your child off at 7:45. That's where, with the boys and girls or the Y, and that's primarily after school, but our staff to provide daycare as an option. That has not been ironed out to know exactly until as we get closer, but we know we need to hone in on what exactly would that look like, because we know that's a real question.
It's not, so my children go to white care in the afternoon, and that's not free. So when it comes to your family that necessarily cannot, like, require a change for that.
Yes.
When it comes to your family who cannot afford that for care, have you talked about how you will accommodate them given the decision being made to change
Okay.
and start to replace them, not all children on a bus route to be able to wait for a bus?
Can we make sure and write that? That's something we need to address, and I appreciate that input. Do we get that?
Well, I mean, either way.
Right.
So the reality is whether you start either school earlier, you still have parents who are having to be at work at 8 o'clock.
Correct.
If your children aren't on a bus route, but you're not comfortable in walking to school by themselves, you have to find care to cover, whether it's your elementary school child or your middle school child, you're trying to care to cover that. And those services are not cheap in this city, like at all. So regardless, if I've got to drop a child off that's not on a bus route, how do you accommodate for those people that are like, I can't wait until 8:20 to drop a child off?
So basically, you're able now to drop off in the morning and then Y care after school? And your question is, if that was reversed on a later time, how would we accommodate that in the morning? Because you wouldn't see after school paying Y care and then paying something additionally in the morning to be affordable, is that correct?
I mean, for me, yes, but for the families that.
For any of us.
Right, because I mean, there are things that can do that. You also have the right here that got you up by what, 5:30, I believe? So if even then, if you've got someone that, if they have to stay later, then how are we dealing with that? Because not everybody wants their kids at home.
Right.
So,
Great question. We'll specifically get that addressed. Thank you for sharing that. Yes?
Not only that, my care right now really doesn't have enough spots to accommodate all the kids in this. If we're going to change the schedule, are we gonna look at being able to provide more services for more kids? Because they don't have the spots.
Right, and that's a fair question, and I know as Jason touched on having conversations with the Y and Boys and Girls Club, we're going to need to have here, and even next week after these two this week, of seeing what that would look like. There's been conversations, and as we're getting closer, we anticipate a recommendation for a final approval in March. We still have some time, but we need to have those very soon, so I appreciate you sharing that. Yes, ma'am?
programming is needed in the community as a whole, and so it's gonna take the entire community to come together for a village here. We need to reach out to our colleges, students that are studying, and create the programs that the people are needing, give them credit for, starting the programs that's needed so people are not having to pay out of pocket. Either way that you go,
Right,
either way that you go,
okay.
that's a free service.
Were you able to hear?
Yeah, we got some of it.
Okay,
Ryan's helping us.
okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, ma'am, for sharing that. That's a great point. Okay, any other post-it notes before we're going to have you then report out if you're willingness? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. Did you all consider middle schools starting at the same time as elementary schools? I have an 11-year-old, and I don't feel comfortable leaving her at home by herself in the morning when they should be.
I don't, it was looked at, but I think based on just the research as far as with the secondary, of starting after 8:30, of keeping that with elementary, we chose to keep that with the secondary group, is why we did not have that as then one of the options to consider. I mean, I understand that, and with your child, and that you'd need to make some type of arrangements, we understand that. So it wasn't a strongly considered option. Fair question.
And also, if you think about it, if we had 9 of our 13 grades going on one tier and only 4 grades going on the other, it would cost a significant amount of money to move them with the elementary than keeping them with the high school.
Okay. Appreciate you sharing that. Okay, yes.
On your early out days, you will plan on having big teachers come in earlier in the morning for meetings. You will have the early out days, you eliminate some of those before class times. It's pretty safe as it is.
I think we will examine as they currently, as far as with the 9 o'clock schools, because I know they've done that at times, that they come in earlier, and that I would anticipate the same thing for our secondary, because our 9 o'clock schools, they do that at different times, and we would anticipate that as well. Yes?
I know this is a very specific question, but it is a what if. If our secondary schools start earlier, for the kids that live on the outer edges, like my daughter right now, she gets on the bus at 6:05. If we would start earlier, I mean, is it something we would consider to put her on the bus at 5:30 in the morning, or would there be other avenues to chase there?
Frank, you might be able to elaborate that, but I would not anticipate any child getting on at 5:30. I mean, that's, if school's starting at 7:50 and would drop off at 7:30, I mean, that would be 2 hours. I know if you said you're at an hour and 45 now,
We're not starting any earlier now. Right now, secondary is the early school.
right?
Secondary, Deanne, you start at 7:50 now?
Or 55. Are you 50? You're 8 o'clock.
The high school is 7:55.
The high school's
It would be 10
7:55.
minutes sooner, or 5 minutes sooner.
5 minutes sooner, so if it's 6:05 now, it potentially could be 6.
So we wouldn't have a situation here where we would increase the bus routes for the secondary schools, increase the time, pickup time.
They should decrease if
They should
anything.
decrease, exactly.
They should decrease if anything.
More secondary buses run, less time.
Yeah. Good question, though. Yes?
Childcare seems to cost a lot. Some of the savings we use to kind of supplement those things and do that. I know 500,000, 150, whatever it is.
Right.
Some of that we use kind of to pay Y or pay what we're covering costs down.
That is an idea that we will definitely look at.
Potentially. Appreciate you sharing that. Okay, if you don't have any other questions regarding the post, so what I'd like is, and Brenda is going to take your comments. So basically on your sheet that had the blanks here by group, and what we'd like you to do is, we'll start out with elementary starting earlier. What are we missing, pros and cons? So what I'd like to do is just to, if your willingness, if you'd rather not, you can hand them to us and we'll put it up there. If I could bring the mic to you and you just share with the group, it's what we'd like to do, but if you're not comfortable with that, that is fine as well. And we can go from there. So let's start out with the elementary side. If you've got elementary, any pros and cons on the elementary side? Didn't think we missed anything, okay? We didn't pay you to say that either.
I think the elementary starting earlier would be greater because I know when my daughter comes home, she is totally exhausted and she is already done learning. So when one of those pros up there was already talked about that the children are spent, I agree. So I think that you guys have looked at the list very well.
Okay, come here. Any ideas on the elementary starting earlier, pros or cons or something we missed? You good? Okay. Do you guys have anything here? Okay, as a group, over here, anything?
I mean, we sort of talked about how it seems like,
Here, Con, can you just right here? If you don't mind.
Yeah, we just talked about how it sort of seems like there are quite a few issues with the buses. And so just continuing to work on those issues and making sure that children are actually picked up and make it to school and don't get, parents don't get calls that their kids are at a different school from where they're supposed to be, and reducing the amount of time children spend on the bus. So we talked a little bit about that. That doesn't speak to this question, but so that is an issue that I think continuing to address would really help children be ready to learn when they're at school. And the other thing that came up for us was sort of related to just wondering, for me personally, I don't feel like I have a good handle on how this really impacts families who, personally for our family, we are going to have to incur childcare costs where right now, because one of us is a state worker, we have a lot of flexibility. We don't have to do before after care. It's going to change for our family, and I think that there are probably other families that are going to, this is sort of passing costs along to them. And so that was a question. And then just wanting to understand more how it does affect families who, the childcare situation is going to change with the schedule change. So really the childcare question, we'd like to understand that more. And then just that buses do seem to be an issue. Yeah.
Well, I'll just address specifically on the bus issues. I know they're not, if I gave everybody a survey and said a 1 stinks and 10 is awesome, that we wouldn't get 10s across the board. I know that, and we have to own that. And so I'm asking if we drop off, if we forget, or if we drop off incorrectly, let us know. We're asking folks to be part of the solution. Let us know, and we'll try to address, and if we don't, then that's on us. But give us an opportunity to address any situation, and as we try to work through these.
One thing that came up here, parents report to first student when there's an issue, and maybe encouraging parents to also report to the district. So, does that make sense? That was one thing that, yeah.
Okay, so if,
Clarifying that with parents, so they know.
okay, if we don't expect, if parents, if they're not meeting your expectations, we do not expect parents to contact first student. We have a contract with first student, that's our ability to provide adequate transportation with regards to our buses to and from on the pickup. So if that's not clear with folks, and if we need to communicate that better, would somebody make a note to make sure that Ryan, could you write that down over there, please? Just how they can go about being a part of the solution to address things that need to be addressed. Okay. Do we have anything back here to report out? We good? Later? Okay. Anything here?
The only thing is that goes back to programming, we can't depend just on the Boys and Girls Club and the YMCA. There's other, people out here that have business plans for mentorship programs and things that need to be, reached out to.
Yes.
For things to be created.
Yes.
They're just needing a building or something like that to be able to help. That's the biggest
Okay.
concern, because Boys and Girls Club, their budget's the same, everybody's budget's the same thing. It's always about money. So we're gonna have to pull together as far as the whole community to get bigger.
Okay. Could Jason or Brian, could you guys get some contact information for the potential ideas that you mentioned there? Because we need to explore those. Thank you for sharing. Over here, did you guys have anything? Do you want that? Okay. Did you guys have anything? Okay, anything else with regards to, on our elementary, starting earlier, what are we missing, pros and cons? Are we good there on that, as far as elementary wise? Okay, let's go to, turn your sheet over to the secondary side. So secondary starting earlier, what are we missing, pros or cons, or other, just any questions with regards to secondary starting earlier that you think that we need to make sure we're aware of, or address if we're missing something? Do you guys here have anything you want to share? Okay, I'll go down the line. Do you guys have anything here? Okay, do you have something? Okay, that's fair. Anything else here? Yes. If you don't mind.
Well, although our secondary student has sung the praises of starting later this year and probably when she was at Simonson as well, she quoted your research, educated me. The only concern I have with moving the time forward for secondary school is that right now she has enough time when she gets home from school off the bus around 3:30 to work on homework before she goes back to any kind of practice or concert. She's in orchestra and sometimes they practice after school, and they have a very short window to turn around and get changed and eat dinner and go right back to their activity. And if they have school until 4 and she gets home from the bus around 4:30, that's going to make that window probably even tighter. Unless, are we projecting to move back those activities in the evening? Maybe start even later, or is it just going to create quite a hustle for families?
That's not been determined, but we know we will have to examine at the secondary level of what that will be to give families adequate time, but also what works best for families. One thing that was brought up today at Gulf Gordon Elementary School was, as far as the start times, that there are families that are not able to get off work to come see their child if they are in a JV basketball game, let's say at 5 p.m. and they're not able to get there in time, or at 4:30. And so could it be bumped to 5:30 a little bit later so they can watch their child? So we will have to examine that, and we're going to use Columbia for a lot of things of what worked and what did not when they made the transition with their 3 high schools. So, good question. Thank you. Anything? Did you guys have anything? Back here? Did you guys have anything? Yes?
Sort of a specific. So I just wanted to come and learn more, but I work at a church here in town, and we have run a bus ministry for several decades on Wednesday afternoons. And because the dismissal times are staggered, we've been able to pick up at all the elementary schools. So because, since we're looking at options of unifying the dismissal times, that means we'll no longer be able to do that. So it will drastically change what our evenings look like at church and the sorts of activities that we are able to provide for kids. So that feels a little sad, even though I certainly agree that this makes a lot of sense in many different ways. So I appreciate you all letting us know as soon as possible what sorts of changes there are going to be. And I'm not sure how many other churches exactly do this sort of pickup in the car rider line, but I think there are others. And so we appreciate you communicating as early as possible. And I just wouldn't feel right if I didn't express that it is different and it's really going to change what we're able to offer and what we're able to do, which is sad, but change is also needed at times. So I just wanted to let you all know that that's going on.
Appreciate you sharing that, and I appreciate you providing opportunities for our students in our schools as well. So thank you for sharing that. Anything else with regards to the secondary starting earlier, of possibly missing anything that you want to make sure that we're aware of? If we don't have the answer to, at least work on that to be able to address or respond accordingly. Okay, so we have kind of in summary here of the elementary, of the secondary, I think daycare, as far as after school, what we are currently utilizing and what opportunities, that's real. And so that's something I know we need to get some more information on and some more answers on that. So I appreciate your sharing of that. The breakfast and our lunch, how our food service, those are some areas that I think we need to make sure we can address. Our start times as we look at what that would look like and start narrowing, honing that down a little bit. Any other major topics? Jason, Brian? Okay. Okay, well, I think Jason had, as far as with our next step, we're going to continue to gather feedback. There has no decision. Somebody mentioned to me that you guys already have your minds made up, decisions already been made. That is completely false. We're trying to weigh the pros and cons, and this is a learning experience. And when you say you're stronger together, that means I feel more knowledgeable now than I did an hour and a half ago. And so I just appreciate your input. These are real concerns because we're in this together, and I appreciate your input and your questions. If there's anything else that you'd like, or if you didn't feel comfortable in the group setting, I'll stay after many of us will, and I'd be more than happy to have any conversation with you, sit down with a cup of coffee with you tomorrow or sometime. Tomorrow would be a good day for a cup of coffee because it's kind of chilly. So I'll be at work. If you want to stop by the office, I'll be there. I'll be more than happy to have any conversation with you on any of this. So is there anything else I need to address? If you hear folks having questions, encourage them to come Thursday night. We'll be at TJ. That one starts at 5, I believe, instead of 6. We want to have 2 different times to give folks opportunities. So encourage them to find out more about it, and we appreciate your time. So thank you. We'll stay after, and thank you again for coming.